So, I want to talk for a minute about my experience with Korea and why I think it's such an important part of who I am now, who I am today, who I'm going to be going forward forever. I don't really know how to start, but the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I just had an idea while I was writing. And if I can word it properly, it kind of boils down to the importance of the trip comes from the fact that in comparison to the culture and the environment that I saw there, what I recognize inside myself is lacking in almost everything. And what I mean by that is the speed, the work ethic, the dedication, the commitment, how everything is taken seriously overseas when I was over there was a shock to me, not a culture shock because I know we have that here as well. But going somewhere so far away, putting myself and my ideas and my thoughts and my understanding on the line by visiting a new culture and seeing what they're all about and conceding that my knowledge is very limited, very lacking. That was actually mostly the motivation of why I went. It's because I have to concede that my view of this world, my view of everything that's going on is so small and it's so limited. And going somewhere crazy, like just randomly going across the globe to a place where I have no real connections, where I've never been before, that I'm completely unfamiliar with, essentially by myself. It was a step into the dark, hoping that I can get a bigger sphere of understanding of me, myself, how I function, what I need to do, what I can do, because seeing a bunch of things like that opens up new windows, new ideas, new inspirations. And in comparison to the culture that I saw, the sheer lack of discipline, confidence, articulation, urgency that I saw in myself was enough to motivate me to actually pick up parts of my life that I had lost touch with, reshape them back into what I wanted them to be, and start pressing forward into a direction that's going to hopefully lead to a successful future. I was going to write a script about this, but it wasn't so much of what I did there, because going in, I didn't expect to go sightseeing a ton or anything like that. I wasn't very interested originally. But, well, I guess that kind of changed, actually, because on my last week there, I was hanging out with one of my friends who I'd met there, and we were going around to historic monuments, historic locations, preserved pieces of culture and history that stood the test of time because, well, I guess they were preserved. And we were walking around an old village that was preserved from the time of a king, and it was very archaic architecture, but it was all still kept very well, and it was a tourist attraction at this point, but it was massive. It was a huge village, and the whole thing was preserved, all the way from the shrine around the where the I'd assume where the king would reside, to hundreds, maybe thousands of meters in some directions of just land and houses and buildings and roads and stuff like that. And before this, we walked through a strip that was filled with other monuments and other statues, and this place more had carvings of figures who were important. So, for example, I don't remember his name, but the inventor of the Korean language was carved out into a seat, and he was sitting in the middle of this super long walkway. And if you take a picture of it, it looks like just this incredibly long sort of the kind of feeling you get in front of the reflecting pool that's in front of the Washington Monument. It's just this huge flat stretch, and then there's the stick, that's the obelisk that's sticking out of the ground, and the contrast it creates between the flat land and this structure is what gives it sort of that feeling of standing out. This was kind of the same thing with this statue of this guy. And they preserved his name. They preserved the history, the contributions that he made to their society. And then there was another figure of war, somebody who helped them through conflict and liberated Korea. And right alongside this was a street, and across the street was just developing stores and markets and corporate buildings. And it sort of felt a little sad because you have this beautiful architecture on one side that's trying to maintain the history, and then a couple of meters away you have like a coffee shop and a corporate office. And something about that felt very strange. It felt off. On one hand, they are preserving their history, but on the other hand, it sort of feels like something that's meant to be sacred and taken very seriously is almost being cast aside, humiliated a little bit, tarnished, devalued. The importance that should have been there, and maybe it 100% is still there, I don't fully know their culture, but it feels like a bit of the importance that goes into these memorials, these monuments, is lost just because of its proximity to generic developing society. Which might be wrong because the inspiration of this beautiful developed country comes from their history. And so, I'm not sure how I feel about that. But seeing things like this piqued my interest in history and art and structure and stuff like that, because it just goes to show you how individuals coming together can create beautiful things. And when they bring forth the best out of themselves, nothing compares. It's revolutionary, usually. It's new, it's fascinating, it's inventive. It monumentally changes society, and that's sort of what happened with Korea, because in their history, most people didn't have really... I wouldn't say they didn't have a language, but they didn't have a good writing system that everyone had access to. And then part of the force that liberated the country from its dictatorial grip... I might be butchering the history completely, but this is sort of what's in my head right now. Part of what liberated them, part of what gave them the power to be able to do that, is the development of another language, or the development of the writing system, which allowed most people to be able to read. I mean, it's the same thing that happened in other civilizations, most civilizations. But it wouldn't have come about if the sheer creativity and capability of this person wasn't brought forth. And it would have never come to the surface had he not worked as hard as he did. And that reflects in their culture, where everyone's working ridiculous hours. I was talking to some of my friends who I met over there, and one of them told me she would go to school, go to work after school, and because of the hours spent in between learning and working, there would only be 4 or 5 hours left before the next block of schooling starts, and so it wouldn't even be worth it to go home sometimes. You would just sleep at the job site or sleep at the university. And that might be a little too crazy. I'm not trying to promote something like that with this conversation, but I think it was the contrast I needed, because something that extreme really showed the lackluster motives that I had. I didn't have a goal. I didn't have goals. I didn't have drive because I didn't have those goals to drive towards. I didn't have dedication towards anything. I was just kind of existing, doing a little bit of work. Self-analysis and self-improvement wasn't really top priority or of top concern. But seeing a culture like that made it clear that if you want to achieve greatness, if you want to bring out the goodness that's been placed in you to its fullest degree, you're never going to be able to make that happen without dedicating yourself to self-analysis, self-critique, in all humility, bringing looking at yourself from every angle, targeting all of your weaknesses over time and improving yourself and building yourself up. Kind of like a machine. And I think part of the reason why there's a lot of churches that are falling apart is because this message is sort of slipping away, and it's being replaced by the idea that as you are, there's nothing that needs to really be changed. You don't really need to criticize yourself. The parts of you that are weak aren't considered weakness. The parts of you that are problems and cracks and flaws aren't considered those things anymore. Instead, it's just inherent traits and its differences and its diversity, and it's beautiful. But some things aren't meant to be looked at as beautiful. Some things are meant to be looked at as problems that need to be solved. And maybe if you overanalyze yourself, you might chop off a few too many things, but it's definitely less dangerous than just chalking everything up to being part of you and inherent and good. Even right now, I'm able to talk to a camera, which is ridiculous because it's not a real person, even though I'm trying to treat it like it's a person. I'm able to talk and articulate my words in a way that I couldn't have done even 6 months ago. And that's because there were hours that I spent either playing in my head back the things that I said or conversations, or even just watching myself on camera like this, where I would look at the words I use, look at how I deliver my speech, all of that, and analyzing it and finding your mistakes and finding my mistakes and fixing them has put me into a position where now I can communicate my ideas a little more clearly. Obviously, I still have too much to work on. That's why I'm doing this. So I have more material to analyze. Man, I don't know what the point of all this is. I guess I'm talking about an experience I had. I don't know if there's a message. No, there is a message. It's that you really have to fight in order to do what's good. Because in order to overcome an enemy, you have to pick up arms. But in order to overcome the enemy that's in yourself, it takes not just those arms, but also a degree of humility that kind of feels embarrassing a lot of the time. When you analyze and criticize yourself and you open up your flaws to not just yourself, but around others, if you do it properly, it feels pretty rough. But that's necessary if you want to develop into the best version of yourself.